The school lockdown. It was a typical Friday morning at Clearwater High School. The students were buzzing with excitement, eagerly anticipating the weekend. The bell rang for the first period, and everyone shuffled into their classrooms. Mrs. Thompson's history class was in full swing when the loudspeaker crackled to life. "This is Principal Edwards. We are initiating a lockdown. This is not a drill." The announcement sent a chill down everyone's spine. The lockdown protocol was straightforward, but the gravity in Principal Edwards' voice suggested this was more than just a precaution. "Mrs. Thompson quickly locked the door, turned off the lights, and motioned for everyone to get down and stay quiet. The students huddled under their desks, the tension palpable. Whispers spread like wildfire as they tried to make sense of the situation. Was it a shooter? A bomb threat? No one knew? Minutes turned into an hour, and still there was no word from the outside. The silence was broken only by the occasional distant sound of footsteps in the hallway. Suddenly, the sound of heavy breathing echoed through the vents. It was as if someone or something was crawling through them, searching, hunting. The students held their breath, eyes wide with terror as the noise grew louder. Mrs. Thompson, trying to remain calm, whispered for everyone to stay still. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came when the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. The power surged, and then the entire school was plunged into darkness. The only light came from the faint glow of cell phones, but even those seemed to dim as fear took hold. Out in the hallway, lockers began slamming shut on their own, their echoes reverberating through the school. A low, guttural growl resonated through the walls, sending shivers down everyone's spine. No one dared move. Then the temperature dropped, a frigid cold settling over the room as if the very air was being sucked out. Suddenly the intercom crackled again, but this time the voice was distorted and barely human. "Help me." It was a faint, desperate plea, repeated over and over, each time more warped than the last. Mrs. Thompson clutched her chest, trying to maintain her composure. The voice was familiar, but she couldn't place it. It was as if someone she knew had been twisted into something unrecognizable. As the hours dragged on, the students began to notice that their classmates were changing. It started with subtle things: glassy eyes, pale skin, shallow breaths. Then came the blank stares, the incoherent mumbling. It was as if they were slipping into some kind of trance. One by one, they began to rise, moving toward the door with mechanical precision. Mrs. Thompson tried to stop them, but they didn't even acknowledge her. They simply opened the door and walked out into the darkness of the hallway. The sound of their footsteps soon faded into nothingness. Left with only a handful of students, Mrs. Thompson knew they had to do something. She grabbed a flashlight from her desk and led the remaining students toward the back of the classroom, where a small door led to the maintenance tunnels beneath the school. As they descended into the tunnels, they could hear that eerie breathing again, closer this time. The growl that followed was unmistakable, echoing through the narrow passageways. Whatever was up there was not human. The tunnels were a maze of twisting corridors, the air thick with dampness and decay. The flashlight flickered, threatening to go out at any moment. Mrs. Thompson and the students moved as quickly as they could, the sounds of the school growing more distant as they ventured deeper. Finally, they came to a large, rusted door. It was partially open, a faint light seeping through the cracks. Beyond it was a room filled with old files, broken furniture, and ancient chalkboards. But in the center of the room was something that froze them in their tracks: a circle of symbols etched into the floor, surrounded by candles that had long since burned out. In the middle of the circle lay a figure, barely recognizable as human. It was Principal Edwards, his face twisted in agony, his body contorted in unnatural ways. His eyes were wide open, but they were not his eyes, they were black voids, empty of life. Mrs. Thompson approached cautiously, the students huddled behind her. As she stepped into the circle, Principal Edwards' body jerked violently, as if trying to break free from some invisible force. "You should not have come." His voice was a raspy whisper, but it was filled with a deep, unearthly dread. "It's here. It's been waiting for so long." Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook, and the air filled with a deafening roar. The symbols on the floor began to glow with a malevolent energy, and a dark, shadowy figure began to rise from the center of the circle. It was a mass of darkness, with eyes like burning embers and a mouth that stretched into an impossible grin. Mrs. Thompson grabbed the students and ran, but the tunnel began to collapse around them. The creature's laughter echoed through the halls, growing louder and more manic as they fled. They emerged from the tunnels into the old, abandoned wing of the school. The walls were crumbling and the windows were boarded up, but they could hear the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Thompson led the students through the derelict classrooms, searching for an exit. But the creature was relentless. It followed them, its presence growing stronger with every step. The air grew colder, and the shadows lengthened, reaching out for them like claws. Finally, they reached a door that led to the outside. But as Mrs. Thompson pushed it open, the creature lunged, its shadowy form enveloping the room. She turned to face it, standing between the students and the horror that pursued them. "Go," she screamed, and the students ran out into the daylight. But Mrs. Thompson knew there was no escaping this thing. It had been awakened, and it would not stop until it had claimed its prize. With a final, desperate act, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a match. Striking it, she threw it onto the floor, where it ignited a trail of gasoline she had noticed earlier in the tunnels. The flames erupted, and the creature shrieked in fury as the fire consumed it. The students watched from a safe distance as the old wing of the school went up in flames, the creature's wails fading into the roar of the fire. They were safe for now.